What is the price of freedom? Is it a handful of silver? Is it a lifetime of labor? Or is it something more? Is it the willingness to seal yourself in a wooden tomb, to gamble your last breath on the hope of a new dawn? In the history of human resilience, few stories are as audacious, as terrifying, and as brilliantly defiant as that of Henry Brown. This is not just the story of a man who escaped slavery. This is the story of a man who, when faced with an inhuman system, used its own machinery of commerce to mail himself from bondage to liberty.
Our story begins in Richmond, Virginia, a thriving hub of the American South in the 1840s. It was a city of power and influence, built on the golden leaf of tobacco. Its wealth was on display in its grand architecture and bustling trade, but this prosperity was a facade, a beautiful mask hiding a rotten core. The city's very air was thick with the dust of the tobacco factories and the silent screams of the auction blocks where men, women, and children were sold like livestock. This was the world Henry Brown was born into in 1815. A world that declared him property from his very first breath. By the twisted logic of slavery, Henry's situation was considered less harsh than many. He was not a field hand toiling from sunup to sundown in the blistering heat of the cotton or tobacco fields. He was leased out by his master to work in a tobacco factory in Richmond. Here, the work was monotonous and grueling. Day in, day out, he was surrounded by the pungent, sweet smell of curing tobacco leaves, a scent that clung to his clothes and filled his lungs. His hands were perpetually stained, his body weary from the long hours. Yet this position in the city afforded him a sliver of a life. He learned a skill, and he was permitted to live away from his master's direct, suffocating gaze, giving him a semblance of autonomy that was denied to millions. It was within this small, fragile space that he dared to build a life. It was here that he met Nancy.
Nancy was enslaved by a different master, a common and deliberately cruel arrangement that kept enslaved families in a constant state of fear, ensuring they could be separated at their owner's whim. Despite this, their love was a profound act of defiance. They were married, and together they brought 3 children into the world. In a small, rented house, they carved out a sanctuary. This home, filled with the noise and warmth of his family, was Henry's entire world. The laughter of his children was the only music that mattered. Nancy's presence, the only comfort he needed to endure the indignities of his existence. He was a devout Christian and a proud member of the First African Baptist Church choir, his powerful voice rising in hymns that spoke of deliverance and a better world to come. This faith and this family gave him a reason to endure. He worked tirelessly, pushing himself to earn extra money, every spare cent of which he paid to his own master in the desperate hope of one day buying his family's freedom. The goal was almost impossibly distant, the sum astronomical, but the dream of standing with his wife and children as free people, beholden to no one, was the fuel that burned within him, a solitary candle in a vast darkness. But in the architecture of American slavery, family was a liability and love was a vulnerability to be exploited. The system was designed to break not just the body, but the spirit. And in the late summer of 1848, the system brought its hammer down upon Henry Brown's soul.
Without warning, Nancy's master sold her and their 3 children. She was pregnant. They were sold to a different owner,
destined for a plantation in North Carolina. Henry was at work when he received the devastating news. He ran, his heart exploding in his chest, his mind refusing to accept the reality. He arrived only in time to see the slave coffle, a chained, shuffling line of 350 human beings being marched through the streets. Among them was his entire world. He saw the terror in his children's eyes, the silent, soul-shattering plea in Nancy's. He was forced to stand by, powerless, a spectator to the complete destruction of his life. He would later write of this moment, "I was obliged to stand and see my wife and children driven past me, and I was not able to do anything to help them. I could not even say farewell to them. I was so full of grief that I could not speak." That moment was an amputation of the spirit. The illusion of his fortunate life, his small home, his fragile dream, all of it was incinerated in an instant. His faith was profoundly shaken. He prayed for a sign, for a thunderbolt from heaven, for anything. But all he received was the deafening silence of his own grief. In that abyss of despair, something new was born. The grief curdled into a cold, white-hot, unyielding resolve. Endurance was no longer enough. He would not just survive in this system, he would defeat it. He would escape. But how? Running was a near certain death sentence. The woods were filled with slave patrols and their bloodhounds. His face was known in the city. A direct flight was impossible.
His mind, sharpened by years of navigating the complex rules of his enslavement, began to work on a different level. He observed the relentless flow of goods out of Richmond, cotton, tobacco, and manufactured products, all shipped north to the Free States. The system that had stolen his family was a system of transport, of logistics, of boxes and crates. And then a thought, so insane it could only be born of absolute desperation, took root in his mind. They ship inanimate objects north every day. What if one of those objects wasn't inanimate? Could he pack himself up like a piece of cargo and mail himself to freedom? It was a plan that bordered on suicide. A single mistake would mean a gruesome death. But for Henry Brown, a life in bondage, a life without his family, was already a kind of death. He chose to risk everything for a chance at rebirth. He had found his method. Now, he needed allies.
An idea this dangerous could not be executed alone. It was a conspiracy of freedom, and every link in the chain had to be unbreakable. In a world where betrayal was rewarded with silver and trust was a currency scarcer than gold, Henry had to choose his allies with his life. His first confidant was James C.A. Smith, a free black man and a fellow member of the church choir. When Henry first explained his plan in a hushed, urgent whisper, Smith was horrified. He called it reckless, a fantasy that would surely lead to Henry's capture, torture, and a gruesome death. But Henry's determination was now a force of nature, a fire forged in the furnace of his grief. He spoke not of the risks, but of the certainty of a life without meaning if he stayed. He painted a picture of his resolve so vivid that Smith's fear was finally overcome by admiration and loyalty. He agreed to help. Next, they needed a white collaborator, the most dangerous and essential piece of the puzzle. Only a white man could transact business with the shipping companies without raising immediate fatal suspicion. Henry found that man in Samuel Smith, a local shoemaker. Smith was not a fervent abolitionist driven by moral outrage. He was a gambler, a man known to take risks, and he was in debt. Henry approached him not with an appeal to his conscience, but to his wallet, offering him a significant portion of his life's meager savings. For Samuel Smith, it was a high-stakes gamble, but the payoff was too great to ignore. His motivation may have been mercenary, but his role was indispensable.
The trio orchestrated the details with the precision of a military operation. The box was built to Henry's exact, agonizing specifications. Its dimensions were a blueprint of suffering, 3 feet long, 2 feet 8 inches deep, and 2 feet wide. It was a cage, not a transport. To prepare his body, Henry had to contort himself into the cramped position for hours at a time, training his muscles and his mind to endure the pain and stillness that awaited him. They lined the inside with coarse woolen cloth known as baize, a pathetic attempt to pad the rough-hewn wood that would soon become his world. They drilled 3 small gimlet-sized holes for air, a lifeline so tenuous it was almost a mockery of the word. Henry's supplies for the journey were a testament to the risks: a small bladder of water and a few biscuits. The destination was the office of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society in Philadelphia, where a coded message had been sent to expect a special piece of freight. On the morning of March 29, 1849, the moment arrived. To explain his absence from the tobacco factory, Henry committed an act of shocking self-harm. He deliberately poured oil of vitriol sulfuric acid onto his hand, burning the flesh down to the bone. The searing pain was a shield, a grim but believable excuse for his disappearance. With his hand crudely bandaged, he walked to the location where his friends and his wooden tomb awaited. He said his goodbyes, entrusting his fate to God and these 2 men. Then he climbed into his prison. His friends nailed the lid shut, and the world dissolved into absolute blackness and the deafening sound of his own frantic heartbeat.
The journey began. The box was labeled dry goods and this side up with care, a fragile plea that would be almost immediately and violently ignored. The first leg of the trip was on an express wagon. The terror struck instantly. The handlers, with the casual indifference of their trade, tossed the box heavily onto the wagon, leaving Henry resting directly on his head. He later described the feeling: "I felt my eyes swelling as if they would burst from their sockets, and the veins on my temple were dreadfully distended with the pressure of blood upon my head." Agony radiated from his neck. The world turned into a dizzying, red-hued nightmare of pain and pressure. He was certain he would die, that his great escape would end in a brain hemorrhage within the first hour of his journey. He bit his tongue to keep from screaming, knowing that a single sound would mean his end. He prayed for the wagon to stop for any kind of relief. Miraculously, a sudden jolt over a bump in the road shifted the box, bringing him merciful relief just as he was about to lose consciousness.
This was only the beginning of a 27-hour descent into a living hell. From the wagon, he was loaded onto a railroad car. The clattering of the iron wheels on the tracks was a deafening, thunderous roar inside the box. Every jolt, every sudden break sent shock waves of pain through his contorted body. Then came the transfer to a steamboat. Here, the handlers were even rougher. They threw the box down on the deck, and once again he landed upside down. For what felt like an eternity, he was on his head, the blood pounding in his ears, the world spinning in the blackness. He was fading, his grip on reality loosening, when he heard voices. 2 passengers, looking for a place to sit, decided to flip the box over and use it as a bench. They complained about their makeshift seat, completely unaware that they had just saved the life of the man trapped inside. Through the tiny air holes, he experienced the world as a ghost. He could smell the river, hear the cry of a baby, the muffled murmur of conversations, the rhythmic chug of the engine. He was present in the world, yet completely unseen, traveling through the arteries of the very nation that enslaved him. The darkness was a universe of its own. It was a physical weight pressing in on him, erasing the line between his body and the wooden walls. In that suffocating void, he battled his demons. He saw his wife's face, heard his children's laughter. The memories were both a comfort that fueled his resolve and a torture that threatened to break him. He fought against waves of claustrophobia that made him want to scream and hammer on the lid. The physical torment was matched only by the psychological terror. Would the air run out? Would he be discovered and dragged back to a fate worse than death? Or would he simply be left in a cargo hold, forgotten, his box becoming his undiscovered tomb? He held on to the bladder of water, taking tiny sips to wet his parched throat, focusing on the simple, desperate act of breathing. In, out. After 27 agonizing hours of darkness and torment, the motion finally ceased. The box had arrived in Philadelphia. It was delivered to the designated address, the office of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society, a nerve center of the Underground Railroad. Awaiting its arrival was a small, anxious group of abolitionists, including the great chronicler of the movement, William Still. They knew from a coded telegram what this box was supposed to contain, but the dead silence from within was horrifying. They knocked gently on the lid. "Is all right within?" one of them called out, his voice laced with anxiety. The only answer was the muffled echo of his own words. A chilling fear filled the room. Had they received a corpse? Had this brave man suffocated in the final hours of his journey, delivered to them not in freedom, but in a coffin of his own design? William Still later wrote that grave fears were entertained for the life of the man who may be enclosed within. Every second that passed in silence deepened their dread. With immense trepidation, they took a saw and a hatchet and began to work on the lid. The sound of screeching nails and splitting wood broke the tense silence of the room. As the lid was lifted, the men peered inside. Curled in the tiny space, bathed in the sudden blinding light, was the figure of a man, motionless. For a single dreadful heartbeat, the worst fears of everyone in the room seemed to have been realized. And then he stirred. Slowly, painfully, Henry Brown began to unfurl his body. He stood up, a man unfolding from his own tomb, a Lazarus for the abolitionist cause. One of the abolitionists present, J. Miller McKim, leaned forward and asked him how he was feeling. Henry, ever the choirman, his voice raspy from dehydration but filled with an unshakable spirit, simply opened his mouth and began to sing a hymn he had chosen for this very moment, the 40th Psalm. I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined unto me and heard my cry. After his song, a powerful, emotional, and triumphant crescendo, he straightened up, extended a hand, and with astounding composure said, "How do you do, gentlemen?" He had arrived. He had survived. He was free. The men in the room were overcome with a mixture of shock, relief, and profound awe. They had just witnessed a modern-day resurrection. In that moment, he ceased to be just Henry Brown, the tobacco factory worker. He was reborn as Henry Box Brown, a living legend, a symbol of the indomitable will of the human spirit to be free. His story was a thunderclap in the abolitionist movement. It spread like wildfire through newspapers and pamphlets in the North. He was living, breathing proof of the unimaginable cruelty of slavery and a testament to the extraordinary lengths a person would go to escape it. He began to tour New England, speaking at anti-slavery conventions, telling his incredible story to captivated audiences. He collaborated with the abolitionist Charles Stearns to publish his autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Henry Box Brown, written by himself. His story was a powerful weapon, exposing the lie that enslaved people were content with their lot and showing the world the fierce intelligence and courage that the system tried so hard to crush. However, his newfound fame was a double-edged sword. It made him a powerful voice, but it also made him a high-profile target. In 1850, the United States Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act, a draconian law that turned the entire country into a hunting ground. It compelled citizens and law enforcement in all states, even free ones, to assist in capturing and returning escaped slaves. Henry Box Brown was no longer safe anywhere in America. He was arguably the most famous fugitive in the country, and his former master wanted his property back.
For true and lasting freedom, he had to leave the nation of his birth. In late 1850, he sailed for England. There, he transformed himself once again. He was no longer just a speaker, he was a showman and an entertainer. He developed a massive moving panorama, a painted scroll hundreds of feet long, titled Mirror of Slavery. On stage, he would unroll the scroll, narrating the painted scenes of slave life, auctions, and his own miraculous escape. It was a unique form of 19th century multimedia performance, blending art, autobiography, and activism. He toured with this show for a decade, educating the British public about the horrors of American slavery. He remarried to an Englishwoman and started a new family. He had found a life of safety and purpose, but the memory of the family he lost was a wound that never truly healed. He never saw Nancy or his children again.
The story of Henry Box Brown is more than just a clever escape. It is a story about creativity in the face of absolute oppression. It is a profound testament to turning the tools of your oppressor, the crates, the railways, the very system of commerce, against them. He saw a system designed to treat him as an object, and so he became an object, just long enough to reclaim his humanity. His 27-hour journey in the dark reminds us that the path to freedom is often narrow, suffocating, and fraught with unimaginable peril. But it also reminds us that with enough courage, enough ingenuity, and an unbreakable will to be free, the walls of any prison can be breached.
If you found this story of human resilience incredible, please like this video and subscribe for more forgotten histories.